I paid you while we at the spa. I told you got a girl, ma.
So I read a lot of books this summer. These aren't all of them. I left a lot of them overseas in Morocco, where I spent a lot of time. And now it's time for me to talk about them all. I don't know. How do I... Bro. Oh my God. Let me start with The Woman in the Dunes by Kobo Abe. I'm going in alphabetical order because I use a notes app to record all the books that I read. I don't use any of those I use some of those cataloging websites, but I don't like them. I use Mal because I've been using it since I was a middle schooler. I use Letterboxd because my friends put me onto it, and I use Backlogged because my friends also put me onto it. But none of them are more efficient or effective than my notes app. It just allows me to share those experiences with my friends easier. But I don't really need to do that with books because my friends don't read. Anyways, Kobo Abe, The Woman in the Dunes. Now, obviously, it has a philosophical point to make. I hate saying that a book is philosophical because what book doesn't have a philosophy? Or philosophies, plural. But The Woman in the Dunes feels like it's specifically trying to make a point. It's sort of allegorical in a sense. Like the main character, he doesn't have much of a past before he arrives here at the dunes, the titular dunes. He has a wife. He has a job. I don't know. I can't remember what it is. Like some kind of business job. Is he a teacher or is his wife a teacher? I can't remember that much. I read this several months ago. One thing that is particular about his personality is he's here to collect bugs. He's very interested in bugs. And he arrived at this desert place to find a specific bug. And then he ended up staying overnight. And, the village took him in and they shacked him up with this woman who lives in a sort of crater in the dunes. It's like surrounded by sand on all sides. And turns out they want to keep him there. And they make him a prisoner because that woman needs a husband. Her previous husband just died and she needs some loving. So that's the premise of the story. And it obviously has something it wants to say. But what stood out to me more than anything, it really sells what it feels like to be living in a place that's so full of sand. When I'm in Morocco, I visit my family who live in a very rural area that's in a desert, kind of. And it's very sandy, very dusty. If you leave a book or a phone on a table for 10 minutes, you can come back and you can scrape off the dust with your finger and it'll leave a mark because of that's how fast the dust accumulates there. And it gets in your eyes. If you're not used to it, your eyes are going to be itchy all the time. And I don't want to paint that place like it's a bad place. I love visiting there. It's great. The people are amazing. They don't imprison you just for visiting. And man, it's so good. Dude, listen, you go out there, the open country roads, you get on that motorcycle. Man, that's life. That's what it's all about. But it is very sandy. The sand is basically the only complaint I have, other than the fact that there's also no toilets and it's full of flies. There's flies everywhere. And also mosquitoes and a lot of other bugs. And there's also mice. But honestly, I don't complain that much about it just because it's a fine place. It's a fine place to be. The book, the dunes in the book, that's a hell place. That is sand hell. The guy's surrounded by walls of sand in this house. And basically him and the woman, in order to stay alive in the house, they have to keep shoveling sand so that they don't get buried under the sand. And every day it resets. The wind blows the sand back into place. And it's kind of like a futile effort that they constantly have to keep doing this. And it's just never going to end. And it's like, why do you live here? Why not just live out there? And the guy, he keeps on trying to escape. He keeps on trying to formulate plans to get out of here so that he can go back to his life. Each plan that he makes fails spectacularly. The dunes cannot be fought against. But the thing about the texture of the book is it's so sandy. It really sells what it feels like to be in a place that's so sandy, dude. The sand gets in your eyes and it makes this gunk with your eyes and it's just so itchy. And it combines with the sweat and makes this sort of gross, sandy, paste. And because it's all in the air, you just keep breathing it in and out. And it combines with your saliva to make this pasty saliva that's so gross. And he talks about spreading it across his teeth and shit. It's so disgusting. And when he finally does the deed with the woman, the titular woman of the dunes, it's a sandy fuck, dude. But hey, I didn't say it was a bad fuck. Listen, It's a new experience, not a bad experience. And then, spoilers, she does get pregnant. And then later they finally, like, lift him out of the dunes. They're like, hey, we like help us get this woman up so we can take her to a hospital to deliver the baby. Because this town does have connection to the outside world. These towns, these villages across the world, they're not completely isolated, So they send her to, and so he's outside now. And finally, and there's no one watching them. He could literally just walk out of the village and no one would stop him, finally. But he doesn't do that. And I'm always open to having misinterpreted something or forgot something or misremembered something. I'm a very inattentive guy, and that applies to when I'm reading as well. But it read to me like he didn't take the easy way out and just ran away like that because he was thinking of a better plan of escape. He was thinking like, nah, this isn't enough. Nah, I have a better plan. When I finally get that plan going, they won't know what hit him. And I'm just imagining what it would be like to grow up as like the child of this guy who's just walking around like, oh man. Listen, a few years from now, man, I got a wife waiting for me back home. I got pussy waiting for me back home. I don't think he would actually be an abusive father. All things considered, he does seem like a pretty patient and adaptive and understanding guy. I mean, he does get a bit violent to an extent, but that's to be expected when you're held prisoner in a foreign land out of nowhere. But all things considered, I don't think he's a bad guy. I sincerely regret painting him as a potential abusive father in that sketch of mine. My apologies to that character. Foundation by Isaac Asimov. I actually read this book a few years ago, but then recently I found a good deal on the sequels, Foundation and Empire and Second Foundation. Second Foundation being the third book, not the second book. It's easy to understand in that way. It's a series of short stories, and it's all about this guy at the start of the book who dies after the first chapter. His name is Hari Seldon, and he is the founder, he's the creator of the science of psychohistory, which is this field of science that is capable of predicting great movements in human history, or rather the future of humanity. It is impossible to use it to predict the actions of one person. Each individual human being is a ball of unpredictability, a ball of potential moving through the universe. But when you combine all of these balls of unpredictable potential together, they move according to a tide that, at least according to the science of psychohistory, is easy to predict. I actually like that. That's the most compelling part of this book, is the idea of like psychohistory, psychology, which is used to explain the behavior of people, and perhaps, maybe or maybe not, can be used to predict the behavior of people. And history, which is specifically with regards to human history, the actions of humans. Psychohistory is used to predict the actions of humans, to predict what will become history. And I really like that. I find that compelling. And I also like how basically every single story is about Hari Seldon just being right. There is a margin of error to his predictions. His predictions could be wrong. Each chapter is basically about a guy who is very cunning and very crafty. And he uses his intelligence and his cunningness to overcome some threat to the future of humanity, or the future of the foundation here. He uses it to overcome some sort of ass-backwards mentality, or some kind of regressive thought process, or some kind of backwards culture, or uses it to overcome, just some military threat even. And it's always like some creative solution, and it's just it's a pretty fun book, and I look forward to reading the sequels. The Martian Chronicles. Look at how shit my version of this book is, dude. The back part of the cover fell off just yesterday, and the front cover arrived to me without this part on it, and it's so rigid, it's so tough, it's so shit. But the book itself is amazing. The book itself is amazing. I think it's a fix-up, which is to say it was published as a bunch of short stories, and then when Bradbury wanted to turn it into a novel, he wrote these bits of these pages of prose, like a page or two of prose, to connect each idea. And as a result, every single story is compelling and riveting, and sometimes it's tragic and sometimes it's hilarious. There's this one story about a family, a husband and a wife, who lose their kid. and a Martian being shows up as their kid that they lost. And this Martian, what it does, it takes on the form of something that is very emotionally dear to a person. And that's sort of its survival mechanic. And so this Martian shows up as the child of this man and his wife. And then they take the kid out to the city, in Mars, just taking the kid out for a night on the town. And the kid gets lost and gets mixed in with another family who have lost a different loved one. And it takes on the form of that loved one. And then the main character, he's like, no, I want my son back. And he goes and he tries to take the kid back and to take the form of his son, not their son. And then all these other people are like, no, be the one that I love. Be the one that I love. And this Martian, this thing that just wants to survive and just wants to live, is so assaulted by these emotions of these people that it can't keep up and it dies. So these people, they used this thing, this living creature, they used it as a tool to sort of amputate the grieving process from themselves. But in the process, they ended up killing this thing. They made one more thing to grieve about, if this thing even had a family. It's very tragic. And then there's another story, which is my favorite story, about this guy who's the last man on Mars. Everybody just left Mars. All the humans, they decided to just go back home. And this guy, he's like alone, and he's running around, and he's just so lonely. And he finally calls up a woman on the phone. He's looking through the yellow pages. He calls her up, and she responds, and he's like, oh my God, yes. And the woman turns out to be ugly and fat, and he just runs away, preferring to be alone forever than be in the company of a fat, ugly woman. Because what could be worse than a woman who is not conventionally attractive? Very funny story, very good. And this is the best book I've read all year so far. The Gods of Mars and Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Let me talk about Tarzan first, because I don't have as much to say about it. It's like an okay book. It's very, like, you can already tell, like, everybody knows the story of the jungle boy who grows up among animals and grows up to be very strong and virile because of the connection to the primal nature. The Gods of Mars, however, I like this one a lot more. I read the first one last year because you can tell if you watch my main channel, which you should, that I like to get into the history of the things that I love. So, I like superhero comics, so that made me get into the Golden Age. I wanted to read where these comics came from. And then that made me get into the pulp novels, reading some Doc Savage and The Shadow. And that made me get into what came before that, which is swashbucklers like Zorro. And what came before Zorro? The earlier swashbucklers like Three Musketeers, The Scarlet Pimpernel, Scaramouche, Captain Blood. And just keeping, going back and, seeing what influence, how did this, sort of working backwards through time. And Edgar Rice Burroughs' books have been a part of that for me. The Barsoom series came out before the Conan series, so Sword and Planet predates Sword and Sorcery in a sense, although I don't want to say that concretely. I might be wrong about that. They're very simple stories, very basic. Nothing's going to wow you, but I like this story more than the first one. The main reason being, so everybody knows Edgar Rice Burroughs is a eugenicist. But, the thing about the story is that it's about a bunch of members of these different races of Mars coming together. Each one a stellar, exemplary representative of their race. And they come together under the blade of John Carter of Mars to take down this sort of, this systemic oppression that has had Mars in a chokehold to a religious extent. And they sort of topple this systemic religious hierarchy together. John Carter and this guy who is a member of a race of black pirates who are ruthless but also strong and intelligent. And the Green Martian over here as well. And there's also a white Martian who contributes. And a red Martian who is mixed race. Because, and this is a very obvious, it's barely a twist. It is barely a twist. The red Martian who is mixed race is John Carter and Deja Thoris' son. But yeah, a mixed race kid contributes to the toppling of the hierarchy of religion in Barsoom. And it leaves off on a cliffhanger that makes me want to read the third one. But my book store only has the fourth book in the series. They have several copies, actually, of the fourth book, and none of the third book. Who got to it before me? I'm never reading another Lynn Carter book ever again in my entire life. I'm sorry, I read Jandar of Callisto, and it was not that good. I read Jandar of Callisto before I even read a single Barsoom novel, and I could still tell that it was ripping something off, and that was the John Carter novels. It is word for word, like a carbon copy, and you'd think, at the very least, I would probably like Jandar more than John Carter, on account of its more swashbuckling elements, like the main character. He uses fencing, he uses a rapier to fight, and he fences like Zorro, you know? And he's a bit of a romantic. And I mean, John Carter's a bit of a romantic too, but John Dark, who is called Jandar on Callisto, he tries to write his name with his sword on the chest of his enemy. It's just, it's so shit. It's so fucking shit. And this book is another one where Lynn Carter... I have to cover this woman's ass. Her ass is out on the cover of this book. So, Lynn Carter is ripping off A.E. Van Vogt in this book. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. And I've never read an A.E. Van Vogt book, but I hope his books read nothing like this. This is a bullshit book, okay? It starts off with our main character discovering he has the ability to teleport through time and space. And then a super hot future babe shows up and tells him that he needs to save the future. Because in the future, human beings are too lazy and they are too indulgent in leisure. The technology they use just creates more leisure for them, and they become fat, lazy babies who don't want to do anything and they don't want to overcome any obstacles, which is how humans advance. And without that, what are we? Very classic sci-fi ideas here. A lot of these older sci-fi books go down that, like, have something to say about humans and their place, like as pioneers, as seekers of knowledge and as overcomers of trials. And this is maybe the least compelling one I've ever read. Star Trek has a lot of episodes like that. This summer, I watched a season and a half of the original series of Star Trek, which clears every episode of television that I have watched in the last decade. It's literally like Twilight Zone in space. Every episode is some great, science fiction idea. And it's amazing. There's so many Among Us episodes. So many, like, oh, there's an imposter aboard the ship and stuff. But then there's also a lot of episodes of, like, where the moral of the story is that humans need to overcome trials, to overcome obstacles in order to be given a reason to live. Without that, human life stagnates, which is a bad thing, according to the logic of these stories. And in Star Trek, I'm compelled by it, usually. In this book, I wasn't. It fucking sucks. And I hope that there is a book out there where Lynn Carter writes his own style and it's good. There's a book out there, hopefully, where he isn't ripping someone else off. But I don't know if I'll ever get around to it, because for now, I'm avoiding his name on the science fiction rack like the plague. I'm sorry. I just don't want to read any more of this guy's books. The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler, but also The Glass Key by Dashiell Hammett. Now, both of these books are noir, right? Or is Glass Key not noir? One thing I've learned is that noir and hard-boiled are different. A hard-boiled story is about a hard-boiled detective, and a noir story doesn't actually have to be about a detective. Noir is more so about the feeling, about the vibe, about the setting, about luxuriating in this dark world where morality is so difficult to stick to, and it's so corrupt and everything, but it's also very stylish at depicting that kind of corruption. Big Sleep is both of those. Philip Marlowe is a very hard-boiled detective. He's a really tough guy. He'll put himself in compromising situations just to get to the truth. He's a private investigator, or a private dick, as they call them in this book. Private as all dicks should be, huh? Who wants a public dick, huh? Huh? Me, please. No, that was a joke. So, Literally, dude, fucking who asked you anyways? Like, what the fuck is... Listen, I love Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot. Those are detective stories where you arrive at very concrete answers to concrete questions, and the answers to the questions leave you satisfied. It is a puzzle, and it gives you, the reader, the pieces to the puzzle, and you are allowed to fit them together as you read the book. And by the end, the puzzle is solved, and you feel satisfaction. That is not the case with this book. In this book, there is no answer that doesn't have 10 asterisks next to it. There is no answer that makes you feel satisfied. The answers only either intensify the mystery or make you feel sick to your stomach. There's so many physical descriptions in this book, so many descriptions of what is it, like the luxurious architecture, the layouts of the rooms. It's very particular and very specific about the clothes people wear and the way people look and the way rooms look. And I think that is a part of noir. I think that a part of the noir is like, yeah, it's a stylish presentation of this very corrupt and gross world. And, the main character is perhaps the most honorable person in the story. But even he, when he solves the main problem, it doesn't resolve anything morally. The world is not better off now that we know the answer to this question. The world keeps going, and now we're worse off because before we were in blissful ignorance, and now we know something that every time we think about it, it ruins our day. And I like that. That's very compelling. A main core part of these noir stories is that they take place in these corrupt worlds where gangsters and politicians are one and the same, and wealthy people, everybody's drunk, everybody's an alcoholic, and they're all like there's so much of everybody's just out for the big score. Everybody's self-preservation to the max. The main character is Philip Marlowe, who has to navigate a world where that is the case. In The Glass Key, it's different. In The Glass Key, the main character is not a detective, he's actually a criminal who is friends with a prominent politician in the city. So already we're right into it. It's not like it's a big reveal that these people are friends. It's not a big reveal in The Big Sleep either. It takes it for granted. But here, we're in the middle of it. We're not following a detective. We're following a guy who is already in the middle of these kinds of conspiracies. And he's here to orchestrate, or at the very least assist his politician in succeeding politically by his underground tactics. He's a seedy guy. I think the book takes place on the East Coast, but I might be wrong. So it's not as luxurious. There's still a lot of physical descriptions, but it's not as luxurious. It's grosser. It's grimier. There's not as much to be happy about on the East Coast. And the reason that he ends up uncovering the mystery is partially because he wants to protect his friend and his colleague I guess he's not a colleague, but he's his acquaintance and his friend, and it is in his self-interest for his friend to do well because he benefits from that. But also because of his curiosity. And he does have a sliver of honor, even though he's a criminal. And he puts himself, once again, he is hard-boiled, but not a detective. So he puts himself in these very compromising situations where he gets his ass beat over and over and over again. He keeps getting his ass beat. I like these noir books. Even though I don't understand them completely, apparently, and this is just something I read, I might be wrong, when they were adapting The Big Sleep into a film, which who else but Humphrey Bogart was going to play Philip Marlowe? Like, come on. When they were adapting it to the screen, there's a guy in the book who takes his car and he drives out and he runs out into the ocean in his car and he drowns in the ocean. But he also has a blow struck to his head. And in the book, that mystery never gets resolved. We think at one point that the mystery has been resolved, but it hasn't. The real answer to that mystery ends up complicating another mystery while leaving this one unresolved. It makes it so that we have to continue on this path, and we never come back to this path because this mystery, it's just done for. And so they call Raymond Chandler, and they're like, who killed him? Or was it a suicide? And he says, I don't fucking know. Because it doesn't really matter. Yeah, maybe you might be able to get some semblance of justice, but justice doesn't come in spades in these stories. Songs of Distant Earth by Arthur C. Clarke. I got this book because of the cover. Look how beautiful that cover is. And also because I've read a few Arthur C. Clarke books before, and I know he's a pretty good writer. But look at that cover, man. And the book delivers, because the book is just as beautiful as this cover. In the story, on Earth, everybody discovers that in 1,000 years, the sun's going to blow up and it's going to take us all with it. So they begin making these ships to ship thousands or dozens of thousands of people to these planets in space that are suitable for human life. But we don't have faster than light travel. There is no faster than light travel. You have to go below the speed of light. So it takes hundreds, thousands of years to reach these planets. And so the story begins on the planet Thalassa. Thalassa is one of those colonies, or I don't know if colony is even are the right word, because there's not like a master motherland, mainland to report to. We start on this book on that planet. Earth has been gone. It's been dead for hundreds, if not thousands of years. I actually don't know. But either way, Earth's been gone for a while, and these people, their only connection to Earth is that they're descended from people who were on Earth. Obviously, they have to be. But they don't have any emotional connection to Earth. And so, all of a sudden, one day, a ship visits. And it is a ship from Earth. It arrived it took hundreds of years for it to reach this place. And in those hundreds of years, obviously, Earth has been gone, but these people have memories of that Earth. And they're not here to stay. They're just here to make some repairs. So they stop by and they're like, hey, we need some ice for the ship. Because everybody on the ship is cryogenically frozen. They don't need the ice to cryogenically... They're already cryogenically frozen. I just wanted to state that. They're not awake on that ship. There's a bunch of people... They sleep, and then they arrive at the planet, and then a select few people are woken up because of their titles and their positions that they have to do. So they show up, and the rest of the people are cryogenically frozen. They need the ice because it helps with the shielding as they travel at the super fast speed. But yeah, these people arrive, and several dozen of them show up to set up shop on this planet to take the ice back and to continue on to the planet that they're actually supposed to go to. And as a result, we get this sort of transient meeting of these people who will meet and then who will never see each other again. And they develop such close bonds. And the main relationship in the story is this romance between a girl on Thalassa and a guy from Earth. And it's such a unique relationship that ends up saying so much about the connections that we make across time and space, the things that we hold dear to us. You know, what memory means when the thing that you know so well has been gone for thousands of years, but in your heart and in your mind, you remember it like it was yesterday because it really was yesterday to you. This is a beautiful book, man. There's not much more that I can say that without just fucking read this book, dude. Casino Royale by Ian Fleming, the first James Bond novel. And just right off the bat, I want to show you just how floppy this book is. It's got a good flop to it. For such a small book, such a good flop. Most small books, like this fucking shitty-ass copy of the Martian Chronicles, look at the flop on it. Look. I'm flopping them the exact same amount. Now you tell me which one you think is more of a pleasure to hold in your hands and read. It's this one. This one's a lot better as a book. But physically speaking, this one feels so much better. Really, they should be reversed because, listen, I liked Casino Royale. I thought it was a fine book. It was alright, but it was no Martian Chronicles, you know? Oh wow, it stood upright. That's how rigid that thing is. It's standing upright right now. I just threw it on the ground and it's just like, bro, come on. Bro, whatever. It's fine. There's nothing that I can say about this that hasn't already been said about it like a million times. But one thing that is curious about it is the words they use to describe the three main characters on the back here. So, James Bond, the hero, Le Chiffre, the villain, and Vesper Lynd, the femme fatale love interest. So for James Bond, we have a quote from the book. He closed his eyes and waited for the pain. He knew that the beginning of the torture was the worst. Because the crown jewel of this novel, according to everybody, is the torture scene. I personally like the gambling scene a lot more. The gambling scenes, plural. Because even though I don't understand anything about gambling, the way it was written here was very compelling. It's like, oh, the banco took the croupier de roulette to the ultimate quattrino. And I'm like, yes, that's Yeah, go James Bond. Get the croupe with the routelier or whatever. What? Doesn't even make any sense. Very compelling. But then we have Le Chiffre, which doesn't have a quote. They wrote a separate set of lines for Le Chiffre. The formidable, dangerous French communist with large sexual appetites, paymaster of Smersh and a master sadist. Okay, that's an accurate description of the character. He is a dangerous French communist, and he is a freak. And also, not as good at gambling as he should have been to be in this place, dude. Goddamn. And then finally, we arrive at Vesper Lind. And they bring a quote from the book. They're very proud of this quote. The conquest of her body would each time have the sweet tang of rape. That's pulled straight from the book. Here's the thing. In the context of the book, it makes sense. It's not like a good line, but I think the point of it is to illustrate the sadistic or like sort of that sort of risky, like violent aspect of sexuality that James Bond exudes. I think that's the whole point of it. There is that element of thrill from the risk of these people. And it is sort of tapping into that fantasy. You know, I'm not trying to be a prude or a Puritan and say you shouldn't write these kinds of lines ever. That's ridiculous, you know. It makes sense in the context of the story. But when you're trying to describe one of your main characters, like, this is the best line you can think of? Come on, man. Get real. Castle in the Sky by Diana Wynne Jones. This is not Castle in the Sky. This is Howl's Moving Castle. The first book. And also my favorite book of all time. I read it 2 years ago. 2 summers ago. This is the best book ever. It's so funny. It's the funniest book. Any book that's funny is going to be one of my favorites, but this is the funniest, or one of the funniest books that I've read. And also, man, dude, Diana Wynne Jones could have written like 5,000 pages just of these characters hanging out. We only got like 400 pages in this copy of the book. But man, this is the best book ever, okay? The sequel, Castle in the Sky, also good. It feels pretty adventurous. The main romance is fine. It's like, it's okay. It's a fine book, but it takes such a straight line from the beginning to the end. It takes such a straightforward path. It's too easy. By the time it ends, it wraps up so nicely and neatly. And Diana Wynne Jones in the first book goes to great lengths to wrap up this story, to take every single plot point and wrap it up in a nice ribbon. But it works here because by the end, like, all of this craziness, like, it's not straightforward. It like meanders. And by the time it has like arrived at the end, it has accumulated so much plot. And by the end, you know, in wrapping it up, Diana Wynne Jones creates this feeling of like the whole thing settling down in a very satisfying way, and is very pleasing to read. Whereas in Castle in the Sky, it just like, it doesn't accumulate as much gunk, you know, to satisfactorily do what it needs to do and to resolve. So it just feels too simple, but it's still a good book. I would compare it to the direct-to-video sequel film to the Disney animated classic. This is Aladdin, and Castle in the Sky is King of Thieves, which is still a good movie, at least to my memory as a kid. I remember being a pretty good movie, but it's not Aladdin, you know. It's Aladdin 2, or is it Aladdin 3? I actually don't know. I think there's a third Aladdin movie. I never watched the other one. I can't believe I read this entire book without killing somebody. I'm sorry. I know this is like the most popular book ever. Everybody has read it. Everybody loves Dean Koontz. I cannot fucking stand this book. It's so shit. It's so shit. Listen, if I had to compile all the reasons why I think this book is so dog shit, let's start with the first line. Let's start with just the first line of the entire book. Chapter 1. My name is Odd Thomas. Though in this age, when fame is the altar at which most people worship, I am not sure why you should care who I am, or that I exist. It's trying to be witty. Obviously, it's like a first-person narrator, and he's trying to be witty. But it doesn't work for me. You know, that tone of voice as well, it's like, it's like he's supposed to be a nice guy, from a small town, but like also he's very presumptuous. Oh, the altar at which most people worship? Really, most people? Who do you think you are, man? Like, what? Like, go fuck yourself, dude. It doesn't stop there, man. Like, all the dialogue, it feels like they're here for Seinfeld tryouts. It feels like they're in a fucking sitcom that sucks ass. You know those YouTube videos where they take a scene from Friends or from Big Bang Theory and they take out the laugh track and it just feels awkward and you realize that the show wasn't that funny to begin with? That's what reading this book feels like. Here's a passage of dialogue. The tower stairs were dark. Unerringly, I found her lips for a quick but sweeter kiss than the first, before she switched on the light. Bad boy. Good lips. Somehow it's too strange, getting tongued in church. Technically, we're not in the church, I said. And I suppose technically that wasn't tongue? I'm sure there's a more correct medical term for it. There's a medical term for you, she said. What's that? I wondered as, carrying the hamper, I followed her up the spiral staircase. Priapic. What's it mean? Perpetually horny. You wouldn't want a doctor to cure that, would you? Don't need a doctor. Folk medicine offers a reliable cure. Yeah? Like what? A swift, hard blow to the source of the problem. I winced and said, You are no Florence Nightingale. I'm going to start wearing a cup. This reads like fucking Ted Lasso dialogue, dude. What the hell? I fucking hate Ted Lasso and I hate Odd Thomas with a passion! It's like reference after reference, and the references don't do anything. Like, either you don't get the reference, or you do, and it makes you sad that you did. I can't stand this. It's so bad. If you liked that passage that I just read, you'll love this book. The whole book is just like this. It reads exactly like it the whole time. You'll have a ball, man. And there's so many sequels, you'll have a great time, dude. You're set for life. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Okay, listen. I started reading this book in 2020, and I read like 100 pages out of, I think, like 380-ish in this book. So I read 100 pages of it and I dropped it. And now 4 years later, I finished it. And the first time I read it, I dropped it just because it was so boring. Like there were so many just like lists of things and like so much like scientific talk that doesn't interest me very much. I'm not opposed to a scientific novel. It's just that, I have had trouble with Andromeda Strain and I've had trouble with 20,000 Leagues. But that doesn't mean I'm opposed to them in principle. The thing about this is when I returned to it, I ended up reading it in a way that made it so much more compelling because it ended up being so much more exciting. The thing about this book is that it's actually gay as fuck. Like, dude, listen, let me set the stage for you. Professor Aronnax, he's like a marine biologist, and I think he studies the ocean as well, like not just the life. He's obsessed with the ocean. He's constantly seeking knowledge of the ocean. He has an assistant boy, a servant boy, called Conceal, who is willing to lay down his life for Aronnax. He'll do anything for this guy. He's obsessed with him. He's a staunch servant. The third main character is Ned Land. He is a hunter, specifically a harpoonist. Pew. The harpoonist, a harpoon, the penetrateur. It penetrates its target, And I distinctly remember a scene where Aronnax, Ned Land, and Conceal are on some island, trying to find food, and Ned Land makes a joke about Conceal, and he's like, hey, he makes a joke like, hey, I'll be a cannibal, I'll eat you, and Ned, and Conceal is like, oh my god, I believe you, dude, you would really eat me, and it's like the whole thing plays out. It's like, what's going on with these two guys, huh? And the fourth main character, everybody knows him, Captain Nemo. Now, the thing you got to understand about Captain Nemo is he made the Nautilus, which is perhaps the most phallic-shaped submarine ever. This is what it looks like. Like a sharp, pointy thing that drives through. And it can be used as a weapon. But also, Captain Nemo is he is the master of the seas. Professor Aronnax, he is obsessed with the seas, and he's constantly seeking knowledge. Captain Nemo has mastered the seas, and he has so much knowledge that Aronnax does not have access to, that Aronnax wants to attain, but he just can't. And it creates this, there's a power imbalance where Captain Nemo is the master of the ship and he controls everything about the three guys. I mean, he gives them a level of freedom, but he also, there's this sort of edging thing that goes on where Nemo sort of like restricts Aronnax's knowledge and ability. You know, he doesn't give him all the information, and there's times when, you know, Nemo is with his crew and he sends Aronnax to his room. You know, he's like, go to your room. It's time for us to do business. We're gonna do things out here. And like Aronnax is like, you know, he has to go, and it's this sort of like almost like an orgasm denial kind of thing where he's like restraining him, like you're not allowed to know what's going on here. You're not allowed the knowledge which is the release. You know. And there's one moment, well, there's a few moments where there's like this intellectual interplay between Nemo and Aronnax where they go back and forth with their knowledge on the seas. And Nemo always ends up with the upper hand because he knows more than Aronnax about this thing. Aronnax, you know, he aspires to and admires, you know, Nemo. And Nemo just has all this knowledge and all this power. And he is the master of this cold steel, this cold metal vessel. You know, and there's this scene where Nemo allows Aronnax to partake in an experiment testing the salinity of seawater in different parts of the world. And they're doing like this sort of experiment together. And it's like, you know, it feels like a little bit more than an experiment if you ask me. So taking that reading to this, and there's this sort of, there's also this sort of like element where the three guys, they want to escape, they want to go back to the land where that's their home. They want to go back home. Ned Land, his last name is literally Land. He wants to go back to the land, you know? And so too does Conseil. But if Aronnax decided that he wanted to stay with Captain Nemo forever, Conseil would stay with him forever. Conseil there is no sacrifice too great for his master. You know, a perfect servant boy, you know? But there's this tension within Aronnax's soul where he wonders, should I escape and return to land, or should I stay here with Captain Nemo, you know, as a prisoner? Because being a prisoner to Captain Nemo means surrendering to the seas, which is this sort of passionate, you know, like decision. It is a wild, adventurous decision to make. And Nemo is so mysterious. He doesn't let on about himself a lot. He doesn't let on about the things about his life and his history and his past. You know, he too is a mystery, much like the seas that needs to be penetrated. You know, and it's up to you to read to discover if that mystery does end up penetrated or not. You know, that reading really brought the book to life to me. Mother Night by Kurt Vonnegut. I read Slaughterhouse-5 and I liked it, and I can't tell if I like this book more or not. I'll say I like both books equally. This book is amazing. This book really demonstrates to me how much I love secondhand books, because this is a secondhand book. All the books I get are secondhand. But this one was annotated, lightly, not heavily, just lightly annotated. And it really, like especially with a book written by Kurt Vonnegut, who has so much to say about time in his books. Like this book keeps going back and forth in time. You know, from the present, where the main character, who is an American Nazi, ended up... He's in an Israeli prison, which, by the way, fuck Israel. Making my stance clear on that, just so there's no questions. Okay? No questions. But anyways, he's in a prison in Israel, you know? He should be in a prison. He's a Nazi. He helped the Nazis. He's in a prison in Israel in the modern day. And he tells us of his story, of his past. And so we keep bouncing back and forth between the prison and the past. And he says at the beginning... Kurt Vonnegut says, "This is the only story of mine whose moral I know. I don't think it's a marvelous moral. I simply happen to know what it is. We are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful about what we pretend to be." And this guy, the main character, becomes a Nazi because he is a spy. He's a spy for America, and he is basically pretending to be a Nazi. And slowly he becomes a Nazi. And he's not like a one-note, like sort of, like obviously he's a Nazi and, you know, and not just a low-ranking like guy who gets sent off to die in a war. Like he's a guy who is responsible for the propaganda for a lot of the propaganda that incentivized the treatment of Jews and that allowed for the atrocities, for these genocides. You know, he was an architect of this. He's not a real person. It's just a fictional character. But he is, you know, he's basically embodying Nazi ideology, despite the fact that in the back of his mind he knows he's a spy. In order to be a good spy, you know, he slowly just sort of sinks into the role, and over there's just moments where I see these notes from the person who read this book before me, and we sort of have like I'm feeling an emotion, and then I arrive at the annotation and the note, and I see that this person before me felt the exact same emotion that I did, which speaks wonders to Kurt Vonnegut's ability to tap into an emotion that is universal, that everybody will feel the same way. You know, specifically there's a moment in chapter 42 towards the end. I'm not going to spoil it, but at the end, I finished that chapter. It's not the last chapter, but it's one of the last ones. You'll see it's like over here. And so I read it, and the first thing I thought was, oh man, what a chapter. What a chapter of literature. Man, a masterpiece that I just read. And lo and behold, at the very end, as soon as I finish the chapter, I'll scroll my eyes down, and what is annotated? Oh man, this chapter. So even how many years ago that this person read it and annotated it, we share this moment, this bond across time, arriving at the same moment in different times, and feeling the same emotion, passing through the same feeling, and coming out on the other end. You know, different people who have experienced that same sensation. Obviously, there's probably nuances that are different that were going on in their mind versus mine, but the same, the same response that we had to the emotions that we felt. Oh man, holy shit.